This is a man who believes that everything depends on him. Everything depends on him. You ever feel that way? If I don't do it, nobody will, right? And you feel like, now, here's what I want you to see. So we see someone in verse 1 who says, I'm living as if there is no God. In verse 2, we see someone who's living as if they are God. Right? I'm responsible for everything. And if I don't do it, then it's not going to happen. Right? And there's a failure to trust God with the everyday things. And so we have here a man who's pouring himself, every bit of himself, into his work. I'm getting up early, I'm staying up late. Why? So I can eat the bread of anxious toil. He's just providing, right? Providing for his everyday needs. And this is not uncommon for us to see people who are, I got to take advantage. I got to get all the hours I can get. I got to take all the overtime I can get. Why do we do that? So we can secure ourselves a future that we envision, right? It's not that we can't get by. It's not that we can't make it. It's that there's something material that I want that I've got to chase after, right? And so the bread of anxious toil here is me providing for myself rather than trusting in God's provision. Right? Where we say, what? Give us this day our daily bread. Now, that's not separated from work. We can work, and we should work hard. We should give ourselves daily, working unto the Lord. Right? We saw that in Colossians chapter 3, right? Whatever you do it heartily as to the Lord and not as to men. At the same time, there's a mindset that can overtake us where suddenly I'm the one who has to do everything. And it doesn't just have to be a man going to work, right? I mean, that could be in different areas of our life where we feel like we're the only ones who can handle and manage my day, my life. I've got to control everything. You ever feel like that? You have to be in control. So this is what we see here. Living as if there is no God, or living as if you are God. That's what I call self-theism, right? So practical atheism, self-theism, and then he says what? The Lord gives to his beloved sleep. What's the point there? What's he saying? You can rest. You can rest. You can trust that God is going to keep his promise, and you can sleep. For those who have a hard time giving over control, for those who have a hard time kind of, with this idea that I can trust the Lord, then sometimes they have a hard time sleeping. You lay on your pillow at night and you're just constantly dwelling and thinking about, how am I going to handle this, and what am I going to do with that, and how are we going to take care of this, and how is this need going to be met? And your mind never stops racing. But what does it say here? He gives to his beloved sleep. Right? This is that relational aspect again, right? His beloved. Those he has entered into a relationship with. Those who trust him, he gives sleep. Is that not a precious, sweet promise? Look back at those words. The Lord, right? If we just, unless the Lord, but the Lord builds the house. The Lord watches over the city. The Lord gives. Right? You see that? It all comes from him. And as we trust him to do those things, if I trust him to build the house, if I trust him to watch over, if I trust him to give, then I can rest. The New American Standard translates it this way. It says, he gives to his beloved even in his sleep. Now, there's a different aspect to that. And it could be translated either way, but that means that even while you're sleeping, God is working. Doesn't that remind us of what we read last week in Psalm 121? Where does my help come from? It comes from the Lord who never sleeps or slumbers. We can sleep because he doesn't. He doesn't. He's always at work. And so we move here from this approach, right? Living as if there is no God, living as if you are God, to Psalm 128. Notice verse 1, it says, blessed is everyone who fears the Lord, who walks in his ways. All right, so here's a third approach to life. This is what I call humble submission to God. Right? So we recognize that there is a God. We recognize that we are not him. And I'm going to live in humble submission to this God. Blessed is everyone who fears the Lord, who walks in his ways. Now, the fear of the Lord is a major theme throughout the Scriptures. And it's one that we need to wrestle with. We need to kind of grab a hold of and understand, what does it mean to fear the Lord? So I'm going to test my Wednesday night crowd a little bit. If I were just to ask you that simple little, what does it mean to fear the Lord? What would you say? Okay, to be in awe and wonder of him. All right, so there's a recognition. If we fear God, there's a recognition of his glory, of his might, right, of his power. We just kind of, if you ever stand at the edge of the ocean and you look out over the expanse and you just think, wow, I can't. It's that, or you're standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon, or you're out on a starry night, and a clear starry night. You look up in the sky and you just marvel. It's that kind of awe. So there's an aspect of fear, right, where it's big, I'm little, right? And so there's an aspect of fearing God there. What else? What? A reverence, a respect, right? A recognition for who he is. He is God. I am not, right? I am in submission to him, right? So there's a reverence of understanding that he is over me, above me, and I align myself underneath of him. Anything else? Yeah, right? I think any child can understand that. You don't want to let down your parents. You don't want to let down those who love and care for, and so there's a fear of disappointment. Absolutely.
That's pretty much what I was going to say. We had a missionary who was kind of a number cruncher. He helped churches that got too far in debt financially. So I thought it was kind of sweet coming from him that he said that the way he put it was like, say the first time you and Amy was dating, being a man, you didn't want to do anything to lose her favor.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Anything else? You guys are doing good. Okay. Hmm. 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 And if you can't hear, I know some of you were back there, he said the more that you get to know God, the more you know of him, and the more you experience him, the more you want to obey him. And I think that's very true as you grow in the knowledge of who God is. And something we didn't mention, I think if we shouldn't, is there's an actual real fear. Right? When you see people come into the presence of God, they tremble. They tremble. I mean, you go to Exodus 19 when God's presence was on the mountain, and there was smoke, and there was thundering, and there was lightning, and God said, "Come up," and they said, "No, Moses, you go. We're not going. I don't want anything to do with that." Right? I mean, there was very real fear, and so I think it's good for us to recognize that awe and respect and reverence, but there's a holiness to our God that should cause us to tremble when we think of him. Is he loving? Yes. Is he gracious? Yes. But he is holy. And so all of those things are wrapped up in Proverbs 1:7 says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, the beginning of wisdom. This is essential for our walk. But notice what it says here. For those who fear the Lord, for everyone who fears the Lord, they are blessed. So the way to live a life that is blessed, that is happy, that's the idea here. In its root, a happy life is to fear God and to walk in his ways. Understanding God has outlined a way in which he desires his creation to live, his people to live, in which they will be blessed. And as long as, and we talk about this a lot, as long as we line ourselves up in the confines of his will, his ways, then we experience blessing. And when we step outside of that, then we find hurt and pain and destruction. Right? And so here, blessed is everyone who fears the Lord. But notice verse 2, you shall eat the fruit of the labor of your hands. You shall be blessed, and it shall be well with you. So rather than eating the bread of anxious toil, what do we see? Those who fear the Lord shall eat the fruit of the labor of their hands. Same, they're both working. One's laboring, one's working, one's pouring himself out. The other one's laboring, but one is the bread of anxious toil, and one is the fruit of his labor. One is sweet. There's a difference, isn't there, between anxious toil and the fruit of your labor. And so we see a contrast here between those who fear the Lord and those who are living as if there is no God or living as if they are God. As they humbly submit to God's plan, they experience God's blessing. See, working in his strength for his glory is sweet. It's sweet. And it says, you shall be blessed, and it shall be well with you. So we see the key here to a happy life, a blessed life, comes from a knowledge of God and obedience to him. Now, what we're going to see is that translate over, right? So we see those three aspects, living as if there is no God, living as if you are God, or living in humble submission to the one true God. So that's going to play out if we want that blessing in every area of our life. So as we work, as we live, and the focus now shifts in both 127 and 128 to the home, which is essential to God's plan, right? God instituted marriage in Genesis chapter 2, right? And then in Genesis chapter 4, we see the family formed. So this is, marriage and family was part of God's original. In Genesis chapter 1, he told Adam and Eve what? Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. This was part of God's plan for blessing. And so he's going to talk a good deal about the home here. And we're going to jump here. Let's look at verse 3. All right, so we have a man here who now he fears the Lord. He's working hard. And in verse 3 of chapter 128, he says, your wife will be like a fruitful vine within your house. Now, that is a really strange way to refer to your wife, right? In fact, I wouldn't recommend that as necessarily a compliment. If you're looking for different compliments to throw out, that's probably not a good one. But here, when we understand the idea of what a fruitful vine meant, it has the idea of a productive partner, right? And when you think of fruit, when you go to the store, you go to if you want fruit, you go to where? The produce section, right? So it's the idea is here of productive. Productive, certainly he's talking about physical here, because he's going to talk about children next. So he's talking about spiritual or physical fruit. He's talking about child rearing, but then also spiritual fruit. There's a picture of a woman here who is productive with her life. And I don't want you to get discouraged, because I know we start looking at the home, and we start looking at, I'm getting ready to talk about, I was just going to mention Proverbs 31. The ideal woman is a productive woman. You see that in Proverbs 31. And it can be a little overwhelming sometimes. What we have in Psalm 127 and 128 is God's plan, God's blueprint for the home. And so many times what happens is we just find people who are like, well, my home's nothing like that. My husband's nothing like that. My wife is not like that. My children are a lot like that. And we just kind of throw our hands up in the air and think, what's the point? Well, just because we don't meet the ideal doesn't mean that we failed to try with everything we have to kind of follow the plan, right? So wherever you're at, I realize I'm speaking into community where we have homes that are broken. We have, we have single moms who are trying to raise children. We have, unequal unions where we have homes where there's a believer and an unbeliever, and that causes strain and that causes stress. And yet we can still, to the best of our ability, seek to attain what God has outlined here in his word. And so we have a man here who fears the Lord, a woman who is fruitful with her life. Not only fruitful, but the idea here is fruitfulness and faithfulness. It says within her house, her priority is her family first. Now, none of that means that a woman can't work outside the home or can't have other interests, but it just simply means that her priority, number one, is her home. Right? And so when we get these things out of line and out of bounds, things get out of whack, don't they? We see a contrast between that Proverbs 31 woman who fears the Lord And in Proverbs chapter 7, it says in verse 10, behold, the woman meets him dressed as a prostitute, wildly of heart. She is loud and wayward. Her feet do not stay at home. Now in the street, now in the market, and at every corner she lies in wait. So we have a woman who doesn't stay at home, and a woman who is within her house, and one brings blessing, and one brings pain and hurt and destruction. Right? You see the contrast there. So the marriage relationship, a man who fears the Lord, a fruitful wife, and then, again, we stick with this picture of a vine. Your children will be like olive shoots around your table. Strange contrast for us, right? But olive plants were extremely important in that culture. They had a lot of different uses. They were medicinal. They had nutritional uses, and this was a plant that had a long-lasting impact. Right? So you have here a picture of a family table. The wife is productive, and there's olive shoots. Just picturing this long-lasting production, and that's the picture here that we see in Psalm 127 and 28. Right? God has designed the home to have a lasting impact, not only on the people living within the home, but we see that spreads outside of the home as you come to the end of Psalm 128. It has effects on the nation as a whole. We've often said, what? As the home goes, so goes the church. As the home goes, so goes the nation. Well, that's certainly true here. And so there's an impact. Now, we should point out, right, these are olive shoots. They're not full-grown olive plants. So they're not fully fruit-bearing yet, right? So we have within this home here these little olive shoots that need care. They need tending to. They need managed. Right? They need prayer. Right? They need to be taken care of. And as you, and this is such a great encouragement to me as a father, right? Yeah, I look around my table and I see these. And they're not fully developed, right? And they're not bearing fruit in some areas yet. But the day will come, right, where they're going to grow and they're going to mature and they're going to bear fruit, and there's going to be a lasting impact. This is God's plan. This is God's plan to what? To reproduce image bearers who will reproduce other image bearers, right? That will be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth with those who are images of God and those who love God and serve him. So we see that picture here of blessing that comes as we follow God's plan. And don't miss it. Right? Go back to Psalm 127, there in verse 3. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. We live in a culture that looks at children as burdens. But not burdens. What? Children are a blessing from God. Increasingly, we see people who are putting off childbearing until way later in life. Why? Because they're expensive, right? So you can't pursue the things you want to pursue, and so we see people continually kind of putting that off and saying, "I'm going to do that later. I'm going to do that later. Once I've lived and done what I want to do, and then I'm going to have children." Well, children aren't a burden that hinder you. Children are a blessing, a heritage from the Lord. Right? They're a gift. And so to look at that, and many times we have seen a dramatic change in the way we approach our family. I hate to use that word, family planning, right? And we've seen Christian homes who say, you know what, we're only going to have one or two kids. Why? Well, because if we only have one or two, then we can maintain a certain standard of living financially, materially. And the reality is that as we, I don't know how else to say it, statistically, we're disappearing because we are not multiplying. One of the best ways that you can fulfill the command to disciple is to have children. It is. It is. You're going to have a greater impact and influence on those children in your home than on anyone else, right? And I realize as I say that tonight, and I know people are listening online, and not everybody can have children. I know that. I know that. So I'm not saying that this is an ultimate command, and if you're sitting here and you can't have children, you can't fulfill God's purpose. Listen, when you look at the scriptures, you can make an impact whether you have children or not. There's a zillion ways in which you can be involved, and we have some people who are great at this, right? And we have people who maybe they couldn't have children, but man, they can teach a Sunday school class and they can invest in some lives, and they do that. They make it their ministry and they make it their desire. We have people who are involved with fostering and adoption, and we have people who are coming alongside single moms, and they're coming alongside those who have children and saying, you know what, I'll help and I'll encourage and I'll disciple, but in some way, as his people, we got to come alongside and understand that children are a blessing from the Lord, and we want to encourage that. And you know, one of the reasons, I'll just be straight with you, one of the reasons we see Islam growing so quickly is because they're just having a lot of kids. They are moving into nations and countries, and they're breeding in a way that other countries are disappearing. And that's just stats, all right? But God has clearly shown us in his word. I spent more time on this than I meant to. Right? Children are a blessing from the Lord, and children belong to the Lord. That's what it means to be a heritage, right? They come from him, and they belong to him. And so we live with that mindset. I'm caring for this life that God has given, that he's blessed me with. And then we see this picture here in verse 4, like arrows in the hand of a warrior are children of one's youth. So we move from olive shoots to arrows. That's quite a drastic move from the garden to the warrior's quiver. But when you think about the purpose of the arrow, and you think about how, in that day you couldn't just go to the sporting goods store and purchase a quiver of arrows. They had to get sticks, and they had to shape and form them and mold them. So they had to be straightened, and they had to be sharpened. And so when you think about the illustration here, then we understand what? Children must be shaped, and they must be sharpened for their purpose. Their purpose, and don't mistake it, arrows are weapons, right? Weapons in this warfare, right? And so children are meant to be shaped, and they're meant to be sent forth, right? And so, if for lack of a better illustration here, when you picture that you pulling back the arrow with great aim and letting go, and so you're going to shape and you're going to sharpen, you're going to form them, and then you're going to let them go to accomplish the purpose that God intended them for. This is a big deal, isn't it? And so, as parents, we should think carefully about how we're shaping and how we're sharpening our children. Are we preparing them to go out and fulfill the purpose that God gave them for? It's a big deal. And we have a limited amount of time for that, do we not? We have a limited amount of time to accomplish this purpose, and then we have to let go. And so let us, as godly parents, let us take this role seriously. That means we want to, you say, well, how do I nurture and care for olive shoots, and how do I shape and sharpen arrows? Well, we do that through the Word of God, right, and through prayer. And so you want to invest. You say, well, I bring them to church. Well, that's a really small amount of time when you think about the amount of time that they have, right? I mean, it's good that you bring them to church, and you should. Believe me, we've told you, we want to help you with our youth ministries and children's ministries. We want to come alongside and serve you. At the same time, you have a responsibility to teach and train your children in the honor and admonition. And I know I got a lot of older grandparents in here, and some of you that has fell to you. And I hate that. I hate that it's fallen to you. But because it has fallen to you, take it. Take it and use that opportunity to teach and to train and to fill their hearts and minds with the Word of God. Because that's what's going to prepare them for life. Different approaches to life, right? One calls for blessing, and one leads to hurt and to ruin and to toil. And so as we finish that up, we see here, right, verse 5, blessed in chapter 127, blessed is the man who fills his quiver with him. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gate. Again, there's an idea of of blessing a number of children here. This is a man who feels safe and secure in the gate because he's got an army. His children, his sons are there. And so he says this man is blessed. And then when you jump down to verse 5 of chapter 128, the Lord bless you from Zion. May you see the prosperity of Jerusalem all the days of your life, right? As we follow, this expands outside the home to the nation, the blessing of Jerusalem. And then may you see your children's children, peace upon Israel. May you see your children's children, right? And so there's a blessing here for life where you're going to shape and train, and they're going to have children, and they're going to shape and train. And here's one of the beautiful things, right? For those of you as Christians looking, right, we're on a journey, right? We're on this journey towards, your children are one of the only things in this world that you can take with you to glory. You know that? There's very few things in this world that we can see on the other side of heaven, but your children are one of those. Yeah. So that when it says you may see your children's children, we can extend that out as we see faithfulness passed to the next generation and the next generation. And that's why it's so vital that we pour ourselves into them now. Right? There's no guarantees. I know that. There's some hearts broken here tonight over children who are wayward and walking away from the Lord. And my encouragement to you would just be continue to pray for them, continue to love them, and trust the Lord to draw them to himself. But we're out of time, so we're going to close in prayer tonight. Read these for yourself. Pray for your home, for your family. Pray for families within our church that will have godly men who fear the Lord and productive wives and children who are fruitful.